In Antarctica, a modest American research base is located on an ice plume. Paleoclimologist Jack Hall and a small team are busy with a very important matter. They drill centuries-old ice to break the veil of the mystery of nature's mysteries. But exercises with a drill lead to a funny effect, akin to what a squirrel did with a nut in the Ice Age. The ice plume gives a multi-kilometer crack exactly across the base. Of course, scientists come to the conclusion that it was not they who messed with the drill here, but global warming led to the melting of the ice cap at the South Pole. To prove this, data is needed. Jack has to jump after them through the gap that has formed. Later, he speaks at the UN conference in Delhi. The scientist warns world leaders that the prospect of global warming with the subsequent ice age is increasingly clearly hanging like a furry animal over the entire planet. Leaders do not understand the importance of a vague warning without specific dates and consequences. An economy that could collapse right here and now is much more important. But after the speech, Jack meets Professor Terry Repson, head of the laboratory in Scotland, who is also studying the problem of global warming. Meanwhile, while people are busy with political debates, the weather is slowly starting to deteriorate. First of all, this is expressed by wet snow in Delhi, the capital of India. Such precipitation, to put it mildly, is not too typical for the region. Huge hail falls in Tokyo. Climate buoys with sensors record a sharp and strong drop in temperature, first near Antarctica, and then in different places of the world ocean, where the warm current passed. The data is being sent to Professor Repson's laboratory. Returning from Delhi to Washington, Jack Hall learns that his son Sam has managed to fail the math exam, despite the fact that he has remarkable talents in the exact sciences. At least, that's what my father thinks. And in general, he is an excellent student, solves problems in his mind, and teachers find fault that the solution is not recorded. The ex-wife asks the scientist to take the guy to the airport the next morning. He has a quiz in New York, and it won't be superfluous to talk to his father, who is always on expedition trips. Jack agrees, but is almost late, having worked hard. He literally snatches the offspring from the clutches of a greedy taxi driver. Sam's plane flies into a huge thunderstorm cloud, after which the crackling from turbulence begins. At the same time, astronauts from aboard the space station observe how huge cyclones form in the Earth's atmosphere. Nevertheless, the student, together with his classmates, successfully stays in New York, whose streets, veins are clogged with traffic jams from Antu. Walking through them on foot, Sam notices huge flocks of birds migrating away in the sky. Professor Repson, after analyzing the data from the ocean battles, calls Jack to tell him about the coming cataclysm. A cyclone moving from Japan reaches the west coast of the United States. Los Angeles is the first to be hit by the elements. Several phenomenally quickly formed tornadoes combine into a giant supertornado, which practically demolishes the city center from the face of the earth. Valiant reporters conduct live reports from the scene of the event, often paying for it with their lives. Helicopters can be seen how the tornado crushes the famous Hollywood inscription, and also leaves behind a strip of ruins. Scientists in Washington are holding an emergency conference. The participants know that there are 3 epicenters of abnormal natural phenomena all over the world. An Arctic cyclone is underway over Canada, an area of phenomenally low pressure has been observed in Siberia, and a record-breaking typhoon has hit Australia. Scientists believe that these phenomena may be related to each other. But so far, the only force capable of influencing the weather so globally and in different ways was the sun. However, no flashes were recorded on the luminary. Jack Hall suggests that the North Atlantic Current could be the cause of the anomalies. Given Professor Repson's data, this is the only logical assumption. Displacement of the ocean current, causing disruption of cold and warm air flows. In this case, the anomalies will continue, and getting worse and worse, which will lead to global climate change. Sam, along with the school team, successfully performs at intellectual competitions. All flights have been cancelled due to the weather. The kids plan to return home by train, which Sam informs his father on the phone. However, moving around the city is difficult due to traffic jams and heavy rains. The streets of New York are flooded, and the sewers cannot cope with the flow of water. The guys will have to stay overnight with one of their friends. Hall's team is counting on simulations for further developments, and it is extremely depressing. Bad weather is seriously raging, and the climate will change in the next 6 to 8 weeks. With the new data, Jack goes to the vice president. I plan to convince him to start a mass evacuation of citizens, but the politician does not want to listen to him. A cold cyclone is forming over Europe in general and Britain in particular. Troops are evacuating residents and the royal family. 3 helicopters of the Air Force fly into the center of the cyclone, which leads to disastrous results. Because of the low temperatures, fuel freezes, helicopters crash, and those who survived a hard landing freeze to death, like a T-1000 in a puddle of liquid nitrogen. Sam and his friends are watching the news on TV about how the sharply rising ocean level is flooding the coast of Canada. Schoolchildren are trying to get to the train station, but the streets of the city are already knee-deep in water, and the downpour does not stop, not to mention the roads clogged with abandoned cars. They reach the public library when a giant tidal wave rolls over New York. She first floods Liberty Island along with the statue, and then the whole city. Young people barely have time to hide on the upper floors of the library with those few lucky ones who were nearby and managed to get there. Jack and his team analyzed the new data and found that they were wrong with the forecasts. There won't be any 8 weeks. Over the next day, 3 super hurricanes with extremely low temperatures will pass across the planet, which will change the climate. One is already over Britain, the second over Siberia, and the third is moving from Canada to the USA. Professor Repson realizes that he and his assistants will not be able to get out of his station, but asks Jack to take care of those who can still be saved. The professor and his colleagues are singing a bottle of scotch while the generator is producing the last drops of fuel. In flooded New York, survivors in the library disassemble warm blankets. Sam finds a work phone on the lower floor, thanks to which he informs his father about his whereabouts. Hall Sr. warns his son about the approaching bad weather. To survive, you cannot go out into the open air. You need to stay indoors and burn everything you can to keep warm. The main thing, hold out long enough before he comes to save them. The incoming water floods the lower tier, interrupting the conversation. A Russian ship floats by the window, which gets stuck between buildings. The first snow falls from the sky. Jack plans to follow his son to another city. To do this, he needs equipment for polar expeditions. Before leaving, the scientist is asked to report the situation personally to the president and give his recommendations. They are extremely simple. Try to evacuate those who are south of a certain meridian to the southern states, or even to Mexico. Those to the north are practically doomed to death from a super cyclone with a negligible probability of survival. After the hurricane passes, the northern lands will be covered with snow and ice, which will become a new ice age. The president gives the order for the evacuation to begin, and Hall himself sets off along with 2 trusted colleagues. The Public Library of New York, where the survivors took refuge, is covered with snow under the very roof. From the cold snap, all the water on the street turns into ice. Those who survived in the city leave its solid crust, trying to get away far away. Sam, mindful of his father's predictions, tries to persuade people to stay in the library, but the vast majority believe that they will be able to get to the southern states on foot. And there is an evacuation going on, as relatives told one girl on her cell phone. Almost everyone leaves, leaving a few schoolchildren and a couple of librarians in an empty building. They collect books to burn them and thus keep warm long enough to ride out the storm. One of the students fixes the radio and catches the transmission. The military is blocking the borders with Mexico, but huge crowds of desperate people are crossing the river into the ford, throwing their belongings on the highway. Schoolchildren understand that rescuers are not up to them now, and they are left to themselves. But Sam believes that his father will not leave him. Hall Sr.'s father conquers the bad weather on a pickup truck exactly until he runs into an insurmountable traffic jam on the road. The further journey will have to continue as hobbits to Aradruin, on foot and overcoming. However, the flood, icing and snowstorm completely changed the landscapes of the area. Polar explorers do not know that they are walking on the glass roof of a snow-covered shopping center. The glass of the ceiling does not withstand the weight of the loaded sleigh and falls through, dragging both Oksana and the people fastened to each other with a rope. The sled has to be cut off and abandoned almost immediately, otherwise their weight would drag everyone with it. While Jack is trying to fix himself on the surface with an ice pick to pull out a failed colleague, he notices that the frozen glass roof is already cracking. The man cuts the rope, sacrificing himself so that the others do not get hurt. The president is the last to be evacuated from Washington. But in a refugee camp in Mexico, the vice president is informed that the motorcade of the country's first person disappeared in a storm. According to the protocol, after the death of the head of the country, his duties are transferred to the vice president. In the library, Sam notices that a classmate, to whom he is breathing unevenly, does not wake up after sleeping. Thanks to one of the books, the survivors manage to establish the cause. The girl has blood poisoning caused by a scratch received a couple of days ago. To save her the necessary antibiotics, Sam decides to go after them on a frozen Russian ship outside the window, for which he makes homemade snowshoes. 2 comrades volunteer to go with him. Teenagers climb onto the ship, where they scour in search of medicines. When they find the infirmary, they grab everything they can, then go to the kitchen, replenish stocks of canned food. Here a pack of wolves appears, having escaped from the local zoo. Predators chase schoolchildren through narrow corridors, but they manage to deceive the animals by locking them in one of the cabins. They return to the library just before the start of a sharp cold snap. Jack Hall is dragging an unconscious partner when the center of a super cyclone is approaching him. Outwardly, this is expressed in sudden clarity. The sky is cleared of clouds, it stops snowing. At the same time, a stream of very cold air rushes from the upper layers of the atmosphere to the earth. High-rise buildings are covered with frost, glass in skyscrapers freeze and burst from a sharp cold snap. Even a sluggish flag freezes through in a couple of seconds. Seeing the whole thing, Jack, along with an insensitive partner, climbs into the ventilation pipe of a nearby building to wait out the storm. The next day, the polar explorers move on. They come across dozens of dead bodies along the way. Everyone who tried to leave the city froze to death on the way. During a rest stop, the partner asks Hall what will happen to civilization after such a climatic shift. The scientist is optimistic. Humanity has survived the last ice age. Surely to cope with this, astronauts from the ISS confirm that the super cyclone has come to naught. The clouds have disappeared. For the first time since the natural crisis, the surface of the planet is visible from orbit. Jack and the assistant get to Manhattan. The weather, though terribly cold, has cleared up, the sky has cleared, the snow has stopped falling, visibility has improved. The deserted landscape is decorated with the skeletons of ships frozen in ice and the icy Statue of Liberty. Polar explorers find a library buried up to the roof, frozen through and without visible traces of human presence. But inside, in a hall with a fireplace, a few survivors are sitting. Sam, his classmates and librarians. The former vice president and now acting president addresses the nation on television from the American embassy in Mexico. He thanks all citizens for their courage, and the third world countries that have sheltered refugees, for your generosity. Then he announces that there are survivors in the northern latitudes too. Rescuers have received a signal from Jack Hall and are sending helicopters after him. Arriving in New York, the pilots notice that in addition to the group from the library, there are many more survivors. Those who have taken refuge in houses greet rescuers on the roofs of skyscrapers. Jack Hall, along with his son and his friends, take a last look at snow-covered New York from the helicopter cabin.